Hello, patrons. Welcome to a special bonus episode of Crime Family. I'm your co host, AJ, and I want to start off by thanking you so much for being a patron of our show and for supporting us. So, it's just going to be me today walking you through and telling you the story of this case that I have for you today. And I want to start off by saying that usually on the main show, obviously, you've listened to that show, you know that we usually cover cases of missing persons or homicide investigations, but this case is a little bit different because it doesn't involve either of those things, but it still definitely does involve a crime and something that is really important, and it's just a really wild case. So I wanted to cover it as a bonus episode, and I hope you enjoy listening to the story. So this is the case of Suzana Thayer, a mother of three and a grandmother of six from small town Ontario, Canada, who walked unwittingly into a disastrous situation overseas. And she was the victim of not one, but two online romance scams, ploys that for her had devastating financial and legal consequences. Susanna met her husband when she was just 13 years old and married him only 5 years later at the age of 18. And their romance was picture perfect, and the couple was immensely happy together until her husband tragically died back in 2016 after decades together. After losing the love of her life, Susanna was devastated and lost, and she never had another boyfriend or been with anyone else other than her late husband, and he, in a way, sheltered Susanna from some of the harsh realities of life. Susanna's daughter, Angela, said that she never ran into any legal troubles during her long marriage, but when she lost her husband, a certain naivete caused her to walk into the scary world of online dating, totally blind to some of its dangers. So, a few years after losing her husband, Susanna was again looking for companionship and was finally ready to move on from her tragic loss. She pretty quickly struck up a conversation with a man named Walter Williams, who she quickly became infatuated with. Walter said that he was a neurosurgeon who worked on assignment in Syria with the United Nations and shared that he was also 63 years old and a widower. So, this was something that he and Susanna bonded over, that they were the same age. They had both had experience with having love and losing their love, and were just trying to get back into the dating field again as widowers, as older people. So that was something that they really bonded over initially. And it was very soon after when Susanna began texting who she nicknamed the Good Doctor for hours and hours on end. Friends and family would comment that even when she was hanging out with them or spending time with them, she would constantly be on her phone, texting back and forth with this Good Doctor. After about a month, the couple began texting I love yous back and forth, and Susanna's friend Sue was quickly skeptical. Her friend even mentioned in an interview with W5 that she immediately saw the red flags that were popping up, simply for the fact that a real neurosurgeon who works for the UN in Syria would not have time to be on Facebook all day long, chatting with a 63-year-old grandma in small town Ontario. So her friend Sue knew pretty quickly that this guy was bad news, that he was probably lying to her, wasn't even who he said he was, because simply for the fact that if he's a neurosurgeon, he has this really high important job. Why is he spending every day talking to you? He's not even working if he's on Facebook all day talking to you. So that should have been a red flag. But Susanna, whether it was her being naive or whether it was just her desperate attempt to find love after her husband had passed, that she just really looked past these red flags and didn't really think of it. But I think a lot of it has to do with, as someone who's older, she probably wasn't aware that the internet could be capable of what it's capable of. I mean, I think the younger generation knows that there's tons of scams and tons of people on the internet who intend to do you harm and attempt to scam you and exploit you. But I think she just kind of took it for granted, or saw that the good in people and believed in people and didn't want to believe that there was that whole world out there and just wasn't knowledgeable of it. So I think while it's common knowledge to people who are younger to stay away from certain types of things like this, I think we have to remember that she was in her 60s. She was quite sheltered, never did online dating, never really dated at all after meeting her husband years ago. So I think it's perfectly, while frustrating that she fell for this, I think I can understand it from her perspective, what she was looking for and why she did ignore all of those red flags that everyone around her seemed to be able to see, but she just couldn't. So, one thing that her friend Sue warned her not to do was to send Walter money at any time for any reason. But these warnings would fall on deaf ears, and Susanna actually went on to send Walter money on several occasions and through many different methods. So sometimes it was through credit card transactions, withdrawals from her own bank account, and eventually had to go to her children to get loans from them so that she could send that money directly to Walter. In total, Susanna ended up sending over $200,000 to this man named Walter Williams, a man that she never actually met. She says that at that time, she was deeply in love with him and wasn't thinking straight. Walter used a series of tactics to get this money, including claims that he couldn't access his bank account overseas, or that he needed help to file his taxes, or that he had to pay for a military leave to be able to leave and come visit her. So, all of things that are very sketchy. I don't know why you would need money to file your taxes or that type of amount of money. But overall, she sent him over $200,000. And that's a huge portion of money to anyone, but especially someone who's in retirement, probably has some savings, and just completely decimates those to send to this man overseas. Susanna even believed, shockingly, that she was married to Walter because she was given a fake marriage certificate. I guess he supplied this to her and he told her that they were married, and she really full heartedly loved him. And it was a long distance relationship and they were married. And in her view, she was just helping out her husband, who had a lot of financial difficulties overseas, even though he was a neurosurgeon, apparently. Susanna finally discovers that she had been scammed after her family reported the scammer to the police. But it was too late. The money was gone, and so was her second chance at love. So as a result of this scam, Susanna had lost her life savings and was forced to move into her daughter Angela's home, a fact that Angela admits must have been humiliating for her mother, because she went from being in a happy marriage to being a widower to having no money to her name after being scammed and conned, and now she's living with her daughter at the age of 63. So after her experience with Walter, Susanna had the idea to write a book about what happened to her, because she did some research after this and realized that she unfortunately wasn't alone and that these romance scams were happening to thousands of people around the world. So she wanted to prevent other women from falling victim to these online romance scams like she had, and wanted to save other people from losing their life savings. So she began writing a book on the subject, but she wasn't writing it alone. She enlisted the help of another man, a man who she once again met online. This man's name was James Kaywood, and he claimed to be in the military as well, and that he was originally from Los Angeles. But he was currently stationed in Asia for work, a glaring similarity to the previous scammer, remember, who was overseas in the military. James Kaywood began helping Susanna write her book, which she called I've Been Conned, a book for dummies. And soon, their book writing relationship began to turn romantic. Eerily similar to her experience with Walter Williams, she became infatuated again, although she had never met him face to face. But there was a couple of things that, while I just pointed out some of the similarities, like that he was in the military and that he was stationed in Asia and all of that sort of thing, there were a few similarities that kind of made this a different situation for Susanna and made her kind of believe what James was selling. Because she says that she was relieved because James wasn't asking her for any money like Walter had. Instead, he was just offering his love and his knowledge about book writing, and he was just really encouraging and supporting Susanna, which is exactly what she needed at this time. I think in a lot of ways, if he had asked for money early on, that probably would have been a light bulb moment for Susanna, because it would have been a familiar scenario for her, and she likely would have seen that pattern and would have been like, okay, no way, I'm not sending any money again. And this would have caused her to recognize that it was another scam, and she would have ended it probably right then and there. But because the approach was slightly different, and Susanna probably thought that the likelihood of running into two back-to-back scammers was highly unlikely, she continued her relationship. Another reason that James seemed different than Walter was that he actually called her multiple times and she spoke with him over the phone. This confirmed to her that he was actually a real person, but although it could have been a real person, it definitely was not a man named James Kaywood, and definitely not the man in the photographs that he was sending her. After a failed attempt for him to come and visit her in Toronto in March of 2022, she accepted an offer from him to fly her overseas on an all-expenses-paid vacation to Addis Ababa Ethiopia instead. So Suzana's daughter, Angela, says that she was very alarmed at this development. And she, when talking to W5 about this case and about what happened to her mother, she says that James K. Wood, or the man claiming to be James K. Wood, had to have paid for everything because none of Suzana's financial or bank records show that she paid for anything out of her own pocket during her time in Ethiopia. The only purchase that she made or any type of money that she spent while in Ethiopia was a small fee for a new pair of sandals that she bought to replace ones that she broke. And obviously, it's highly unlikely that she would have been able to afford this type of trip to Ethiopia, given the fact that she had given her life savings to Walter Williams just months earlier. So Angela knew that obviously this man had offered to pay for everything, flights, hotel, food, everything. And that seemed like a great deal to Suzana, who says that she just wanted an adventure. And this is exactly what James was claiming to be able to provide her. And it all sounded too good to be true to Angela. But for Suzana, she fell right into the trap and accepted her ticket to Ethiopia. She arrived in the country on August 12th, 2022, for the adventure of a lifetime. Note that he wasn't offering to fly her to LA, where he said he lived or was from, but he was flying her to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where he claims that he was on a work assignment and that he would meet her there shortly after her arrival. So when Suzana arrives on August 12th, 2022, in Addis Ababa, there was a car that was waiting for her and took her to a hotel, where W5 explains that it seemed hotel staff were expecting her. Suzana says in an interview that she felt like a princess upon her arrival at the beautiful hotel. James calls her shortly after her arrival to say that he would be a few days behind her, but that he would definitely be there. James specifically requested for her to stay in her hotel at all times, but Suzana didn't listen. She would often leave to explore the city on her own and to get to know the culture, because this was Suzana's first time outside of Canada after all. She actually told the reception desk that if James called while she was out, not to tell him that she was out of the hotel, because she was clearly going against his orders to stay put. Suzana spent 3 weeks in this apartment-style hotel in the heart of Addis Ababa, but never actually met this mysterious James K. Wood at any time. Hotel staff claimed that she did meet with 2 men occasionally during her 3 weeks there, and there was a cell phone video that was taken by Suzana from the back seat of a moving car that showed these 2 men in the driver and passenger seats. They were taking her to get a COVID test, which is one of the country's restrictions for international travelers. And these men claimed to be associates of James K. Wood, and that they were going to be helping and assisting her with things while she was there, such as visiting her in the hotel, driving her to get COVID tests in James' absence. So during her stay, Suzana remained in constant contact with family and friends, even falsely claiming to have gone on a safari, which her friends sussed out right away was not the truth, because the photos that Suzana was sending her were professional stock photos from online websites. So why would Suzana lie to her friend about her adventures in Africa and say she was going out on safaris when really she wasn't doing much other than, visiting the hotel cafe or exploring the city on her own, and sometimes going for occasional drives and meeting up with these 2 associates of James K. Wood. Perhaps she knew that her friend would be highly concerned if she told her all of this information, that she didn't meet James, that James wasn't there, and that he kept saying he was going to be back. Like, maybe she just didn't want to hear it. She probably had heard it before from her friends who were skeptical and trying to warn her, and she was just over their judgment. So she probably was just like, okay, I'm going to send them photos of safaris and show that I'm having a great time, and maybe they'll stop pestering me about James. And if I just say that I'm with him or I say that I'm having a great time, they'll just believe me. But she was never with James at all. He was stringing her along just like he had always before, wasn't showing up, he always had an excuse. Now, investigators have since said that they were unable to identify the 2 men in the cell phone video, as their faces are not clearly visible. But an investigator speaking to W5 says that it's clear that the 2 men are speaking in broken English and sound to be from Western Africa, specifically Nigeria. And the W5 reporter also brings it up that Nigeria has sort of that reputation for being involved with online scams and frauds. We've all heard the story of someone who says, I'm a Nigerian prince, or I'm stuck in Nigeria, I need help getting home, and all of that sort of thing. So he says that by listening to the video that Suzana took on her phone that had these 2 men in it, he was able to, while he couldn't see their face, one could be slightly seen in the rear view mirror, because remember, Suzana's in the back seat and she's filming them in the front seat and she's filming out the window as they're driving and all of this stuff. And she can see, like, the man's eyes in the rearview mirror, the guy driving, but the guy in the passenger seat can't be seen at all in this video. So all he has to go on is really, the dialect that they're speaking. Like, it's broken English, so English isn't their first language. And he can maybe tell by the dialect or the way they're speaking, he can kind of piece together what region of the world they're from. And he says that it's most likely Western Africa, but specifically Nigeria. So it seems that during this 3-week period, Susanna was building bonds with the hotel staff. She was there very often, interacting with them. Like, she has tons of pictures, which W5 shows in their 2-episode coverage on this case. Her in taking photos of the staff, and they seemed to like her and they got along, and she became quite known to them because she was there for 3 weeks. And also, remember I said that when she first arrived at the hotel, it seemed that they were expecting her. Like, maybe this person who claimed to be James K. Wood had told them, like, make her feel at home, make her feel comfortable, all that sort of thing. So it seemed like she was having a great time with the locals who worked there. But like I said, never once did she meet James, who always had an excuse for the reason of his late arrival in Ethiopia. And he claimed that he was waiting for his replacement who hadn't yet arrived, and that he had to wait for this replacement to get to where he was before he could be then discharged and then leave the country to come to Ethiopia to see her. And she bought this lie all the time. Every day it would be, oh, sorry, he didn't arrive today, he's delayed again. Next day, same thing. So it went on for a while. After nearly 3 weeks in Addis Ababa, Susanna's tourist visa was set to expire, and therefore plans were made for her to fly back to Toronto. However, shortly before her departure date, a change was made and she was going to be flying to Hong Kong instead, because James claimed that they were sending him to Hong Kong on his next assignment, but that he could meet her there. So, of course, in Ethiopia, I guess your tourist visa is probably only good for 3 weeks. So once she was kind of getting close to that 3-week expiration date on her visa, she had to have it renewed. So she either had to renew that visa to stay there longer, which probably would have been a long process. She would have had to do more paperwork explaining why she's staying, or they would have to fly her out of that country to somewhere else. So the original plan, I guess, was for her to fly back home to Toronto. But then at the last minute or a few days before, it sort of changed. And then James came back and said to her, I'm actually going to be stationed in Hong Kong next, so I'm going to buy you a ticket to fly from Ethiopia to Hong Kong, and you can meet me there. Again, no red flags really up for Susanna. She believed it the whole time. But this set off alarm bells for friends and family, on top of the many other alarm bells that were leading up to this point. And at one point, Susanna's friend, Sue, claims that she even told Susanna that she was fearing that these men were grooming her to become a drug runner. But Susanna didn't heed any of these warnings, and she believed that James loved her and that he was waiting for her in Hong Kong. And in the meantime, back in Barrie, Ontario, Canada, Susanna's daughter Angela and her grandson did a reverse photo lookup on the photos that James K. Wood was using in his dating profiles. Angela says that her son, which was Susanna's grandson, was much better at technology and the computer, so he was able to go online and do a reverse photo lookup. So supply the picture, and then it will tell you where the photo originated from. It will tell you where online this photo is, all of that sort of information. And it came back as a series of scam alerts, which confirmed Angela's worst fear, that Susanna had again been conned, but this time, the motive of the scammer wasn't quite known yet. Like, he hadn't received any money from Susanna. Susanna wasn't paying him anything. I mean, she didn't have any more money to give him at this point, but she wasn't out any money. And in fact, he was paying for her to do all these things. He paid for her to have this trip and for her nice hotel and all this stuff. So it wasn't explicit yet, just exactly what the scam was this time. Shortly before Susanna left Ethiopia for her new destination of Hong Kong, the men that claimed to be James K. Wood's associates arrived at the hotel one last time. But this time, they came bearing some gifts. A brand new suitcase that was filled with tons of new dresses for her to wear in Hong Kong. It seemed that James had paid for these new clothes for Susanna, which was just another kind act that was too good to be true for most people, but to Susanna, it was a kind gesture from the love of her life. So Susanna left Ethiopia after being there for nearly 3 weeks, and she flew with the new suitcase and the clothes inside it that these men had given her, and she flies to Hong Kong. But this is when disaster strikes and things go terribly, terribly wrong. Upon inspections at customs, when she got to the Hong Kong airport, border officials noticed, when inspecting her luggage, that the dresses inside the suitcase were unusually heavy. And so they inspect the luggage, they take out the dresses, and this is when officials found cocaine inside 262 buttons attached to her new dresses. So the officials found 1 kilogram, or roughly 2.2 pounds, of cocaine that amounts to a street value of 150,000 Canadian dollars. I feel like we've heard cases where people will be given suitcases or have suitcases where the drugs are found in the lining of the suitcase. But in this event, it wasn't the suitcase itself. It was inside the buttons of the dresses. So there were 262 buttons in total between all the dresses. They must have given her like dozens of dresses that all had buttons and totaling 262 buttons. And inside each one was a little bit of cocaine that totaled up to that 1 kilo. So it's pretty wild that that much amount was taken. And I always wonder, I'm wondering in this case, was the fact that it was in the buttons, is this a unique thing? I mean, because I said we've all heard the story, or maybe not all, but you've likely heard a story, or you could have heard a story where the suitcase is the one that's been tampered with. So maybe this drug syndicate was smarter and thought like, oh, well, if giving her the suitcase raises the alarms, we're not going to put it in the suitcase because she might be very happy to get these new dresses. So even if she doesn't trust the suitcase, she might still take the dresses that are in it and pack those dresses in a different suitcase. But even if she does that, I mean, the cocaines are in the button of the dresses. So as long as she brings the dresses with her, she will be caught, or she will get not caught, but she will get the drugs into Hong Kong. So they might have been even smarter and tried to one up that so that the usual, suspect of like a suitcase might not have been a problem for them if they just stuck to putting it on the dresses. So Suzana was, of course, shocked when she found out that the dresses that she had been given had been filled with cocaine. And Suzana was interrogated without any lawyer present. She was told that she wasn't allowed to have her legal representation. The interrogation is actually filmed on video, and some of it is played in the W5 episodes that cover this case. Suzana says that before the video camera for this interrogation was turned on, that she claims that she was handcuffed to the chair and interrogated for 16 hours. And when she was finally arrested, she was walked out with a hood over her head in handcuffs. So back at home in Canada, Angela found that her mother was arrested for drug trafficking and imprisoned in a Hong Kong maximum security prison near the airport. A drug charge like this in Hong Kong could lead to life imprisonment. The case was released to the Hong Kong public. That photo of her being taken out and escorted away in handcuffs and a hood over her head made her look like, the worst of criminals. That they put that hood over your head and they photograph you taking that walk of shame. And that's what they did to her. They released it publicly. So people in Hong Kong saw this woman. They couldn't see her face, but they just saw her and known as a drug smuggler who had been caught at the airport with over $150,000 Canadian in cocaine. Suzana's quiet life in Barrie, Ontario was uprooted by these online scammers who exploited her search for love for their own nefarious and criminal means, not only once, but twice. So the Canadian investigative series W5 that I said did 2 episodes covering this case. And in these episodes, they interview Suzana's daughter, Angela. The episode's called The Cocaine Buttons. And Angela, in this documentary, it shows her, she travels to Hong Kong shortly after her mother's arrest to visit her behind bars. And they kind of follow her on her week-long trip in Hong Kong. And she's actually able to see her mother in the jail for 15 minutes. And she was expected to have a second meeting with her mother a couple of days later. But as she's on her way there for her second visit, she gets a phone call that tells her that a COVID-19 outbreak in the prison prevents her from being able to go and visit. So Angela had traveled to the other end of the world to visit her mother for what turned out to only be one 15-minute visit. So it's quite a wild case, and it's pretty wild that she was able to fall for this twice, and that while she was caught at the airport, and that wasn't obviously their goal, they wanted to get these drugs into Hong Kong, she's still the one who took the fall, even though the evidence shows that she had nothing to do with it. She was just an unwitting participant by falling for this scam. So Angela Thayer was actually able to enlist the help of a man who lived in Hong Kong named John Witherspoon. He was a 76-year-old Catholic pastor who created quite the name for himself in Hong Kong because he became known for assisting and advocating for people who were tricked into becoming drug mules overseas. He helps with the investigation and helps to gather clues and information that can bring those responsible to justice and also exonerate the victims, who are guilty of nothing other than being gullible enough to fall for the scams. So he is a humanitarian in every sense of the word. So this man, who's this priest, he has this really great organization where he's really advocating for these people, because this is a huge organization. All these people around the world being tricked to become drug mules, smuggling drugs, or forced to do it, even if it's not Suzana's case where she had literally no knowledge of it. There could be people who have knowledge of it, but maybe they're extorted, they're blackmailed, convinced, manipulated in order to do it. So whatever the case may be, but there are these people at work all around the world who are taking innocent people and making them drug mules. So this man is really wanting to advocate against that. And he does lots of great things. Like, he also hosts dinner for people who are struggling with addictions, and he provides counseling for sex workers in Hong Kong. So just a really amazing man. And in this W5 episode called The Cocaine Buttons, they really interview him, and you get a little bit of his story as well. So definitely inspiring to see that there's someone out there like him who just wants to do good for people. And it's John Witherspoon, this man, who kind of helps lead the investigation into who gave Suzana that suitcase and who the two men in Suzana's cell phone videos were. Because Suzana didn't really have their names. She had that video that really couldn't capture their faces at all. And she had no information about them. So really hard to, bring them to justice or to find out who they are. John had his work cut out for him, because kind of proving who these people were or finding out who they were was a really difficult task, because professional drug syndicates are going to take great measures to prevent such identifications. It's not going to be easy to just find out who these people were that were involved. So this investigation led him from Hong Kong to Ethiopia, and he goes and visits the exact hotel that Suzana spent those 3 weeks in. He speaks with a waiter from the hotel restaurant who remembers meeting Suzana. He remembers her as the writer, because she had told him that she was writing a book about being scammed. John, interviews a bunch of people. He even tries to get valuable surveillance footage from the hotel lobby so that they can find the identity of the man who brought this suitcase up to Suzana's room. But by the time that John is able to convince the local police to provide an order for the hotel to turn over these tapes, it's too late. The surveillance footage is on an automatic delete cycle and had been deleted 3 weeks earlier. So John was just 3 weeks behind the ball, unfortunately, due to all the bureaucracies and having to get that kind of approval from the local police. So that surveillance footage that might capture this person on camera in full was gone. And meanwhile, the prosecution in Suzana's case were confident that they had such compelling evidence to convict her. They were going to sentence to what to her would be a lifetime behind bars. She was already in her mid-60s by this point. Even if she got 20 years, which was like the minimum sentence, she would still be mid-80s by the time she got out. Could be 30 years. So it could be for her a life sentence. So after the W5 special, The Cocaine Buttons, aired, this brought a lot of new international attention to Suzana's case. And it was shortly after this, I believe that special aired in March of 2023 or in the spring at some point. And shortly after this, Suzana was, quote, summoned out of the blue, end quote, to a Hong Kong courthouse with no warning or reasoning. However, the news was good. She found out that the charges against her were being dropped. Hong Kong lawyer Michael Arthur, who W5 interviews, he says that it's extremely unusual for a case like this to be dropped before trial. And totally out of the blue, without any warning. And he questions, why was that the case? In the meantime, Angela even got the local police involved back in Canada during the investigation. She went, got the help of John in Hong Kong. Then when she was back in Canada, she could only have intermittent calls with her mother in prison. And she was devastated that she had the real prospect that she might never see her mother again, because her mother could be locked up for life. So she went to the local police, and usually this is something that's far beyond their jurisdiction to deal with. Like, a small local police department in Ontario couldn't really do something for a crime that happened in Ethiopia. But there was this police sergeant who did get involved, and he actually took on the case and had his own troubles with the investigation. He says to W5 that Ethiopian officials were unwilling to provide crucial evidence in the case unless they received monetary payments. This evidence was in the form of surveillance footage hard drives from that hotel that Suzana stayed at. So he hoped that he would be able to take the hard drives of the surveillance footage and restore it to get some of that deleted footage that John was unable to get because it had been deleted. So the Barrie police declined this extortion attempt. So the Ethiopian officials were saying, we have this hard drive, but we're not handing it over to you unless you pay us a cash payment. But the Barrie police were like, no way, we're not going to be extorted by this foreign country, and we're not going to be dealing with it this way. So therefore, they never recovered this footage that was on that hard drive, if there was any. But in a last-ditch effort, the police in Barrie sent a detailed letter to the Canadian consulate in Hong Kong, hoping that they could share information about the case and about romance scams in general to be able to educate them and prove that Suzana matches the description of a person who is a likely victim of these romance scams. And he also hoped that he could pass this on to the consulate and that the consulate would then pass it on to the authorities and the prosecution in Suzana's case to help get her released from prison. So like I said, Suzana was released from prison after she was summoned to that courthouse, and she was released from prison after 270 days behind bars, which is nearly 9 months. Lawyer Michael Arthur was shocked at the development, and he wanted to know one specific thing. What changed from the time that the prosecution claimed to have strong evidence against her to the time when they dropped the charges? Remember, they had said, we have clear evidence that Suzana was a knowing participant in this. We have evidence to put her behind bars. And then shortly after that, they changed their tune, bring her to a courthouse, and drop the charges without warning. So he surmises that maybe they watched the W5 special, because that case and that episode of W5 actually was quite popular and did gain traction in Hong Kong legal circles after it aired. So he thinks that maybe this put pressure on them after seeing that to see what really happened in this case and to find out and see that Suzana was innocent in this whole thing. But he doesn't know, but he wants to know what caused them to drop the case. Also, Suzana's lawyer wants to know the exact date that they found out whatever evidence they needed to drop the case, and whether or not the Hong Kong officials knew well beforehand that the case was going to be dropped and when they eventually released her. So if they found out months prior that they had this information and that they were going to be releasing her and they were going to drop the cases, but they might not have summoned her to that courthouse. So she could have been sitting in jail for a couple of months while they knew that she was innocent. She was still in prison until they brought her to that courthouse to drop the charges. So in that event, like if they knew for a significant amount of time before they released her, Suzana could have been wrongly imprisoned without cause in that Hong Kong maximum security prison. And this could entitle her maybe to some financial compensation or some legal compensation because, I highly doubt that they found out that they had no case and they summoned her to that courthouse that same day. So she could have been sitting in that, like I said, for a month or so, wrongfully in prison when the authorities knew that she was innocent, but still kept her in prison for that month until she was summoned to the court. So that date is really important. So we know, and also knowing what precipitated that. Like, it's very suspicious that something just randomly happened out of the blue and that nothing was being told to Suzana or her lawyers about what had happened. While we still have those questions, we did get a good outcome in this case. Suzana returned home to Canada after 9 long months in prison. And after her return to Canada, she moved back into her daughter Angela's guest room. But not all family members have welcomed her back with open arms. Some family and friends abandoned her. They were angry with her. Maybe they were angry that she fell for these scams, or maybe she borrowed money from them in her initial scam with Walter, and they were just pissed at her that she had fallen for it and that she had given their money to this guy overseas. But I don't really know the real reason. It didn't really go into that, but just know that she wasn't really fully embraced by everyone in her life. But the real ones who mattered most in her life did embrace her, of course, like her daughter, let her move back in with her, and her immediate family was very much happy to have her back. And in a happy ending, Suzana even found love for real this time back in Canada. She and her new partner are happy, and Suzana has sworn to never online date again. While it has a happy ending in that way, to date, no one has been brought to justice in this case. The men claiming to be James K. Wood's associates were never found, and James K. Wood himself was never found. Obviously, these associates that had contact with Suzana while she was in Ethiopia, obviously they were involved in the whole plot because they brought her this suitcase with the dresses inside. So it's highly, highly unlikely that they're going to claim they didn't know what was in the dresses. And my question is, could these men have been James K. Wood? Like maybe she was communicating with these two men the whole time. And maybe that's who these two men made that fake profile and lured her there under the guise that they were just working for James K. Wood. The true identity of James and Walter Williams, for that matter, were never discovered. And I also question, were these two profiles the same person or persons? Like maybe they did the Walter scam and they were behind that as kind of an initial test or an initial scam. And then they stole all of her money and then they entrapped her again by using a different tactic that would cause Suzana to be unsuspecting and fall for it again. So to me, it seems far too coordinated to have been a coincidence that she was scammed twice in this way. I do believe that the same crime syndicate fooled her once and stole her money, and then used different approaches to scam her again, but this time by not just stealing her money, but her freedom. So I think that, maybe they were playing the long game. Maybe they're like, okay, we're going to do this initial scam, steal her money, and then we're going to then approach her when she says she wants to write a book. Then we're going to approach her and help her and support her through that, but use a different tactic by not asking for money this time, but we're going to just fly her overseas and all of that. So I really do think it's coordinated, and these two profiles were linked. I also think that the two associates Suzana spent time with were low on the hierarchy in this crime syndicate, because the head honchos and the people at the top are never going to show their faces to the victims that they're targeting to become mules. I mean, they're never just going to hang out with her and visit her in the hotel room multiple times. I think these two associates were local men, either in Ethiopia, or they were men like that one guy had said, maybe from Nigeria, who had been hired by this drug ring to do the groundwork and to meet with the target on the ground and form that relationship. So these things are well coordinated. Like, drug syndicates, they're very well coordinated and planned, and every person plays their part. So I do believe that these two men are somewhere obviously involved, and I think that they're lower on the hierarchy overall. I also have the question of, why did the prosecution drop her case out of the blue? What transpired to cause this? And also, why would the Ethiopian authorities refuse to hand over that critical evidence to Bari police without a cash payment? I question, could they have been involved somehow as well? Like, if it's a corrupt police organization, like maybe they were somehow involved, or they were trying to keep things hush hush about it. I mean, that's all allegedly. That's just my perspective. I don't know. But that's just a question I have, is because why would a police department request monetary payment before they hand over critical evidence? Like, that to me is unheard of, unless you have something to hide or that you are involved in something. So these are all questions that we still don't know the answers to, but you know a little bit of what I think, and I want to know what you think. So who do you think these men were? Do you think that the two scams were connected to each other? Who do you think these associates were? And what's up with the Ethiopian police and the authorities who are trying to kind of get in between that investigation and not handing over that valuable evidence? So I guess the moral of the story here is, one thing to take away from it is, if you're traveling abroad and a new acquaintance gifts you with a new suitcase to take with you on your trip, do not accept the suitcase or anything inside the suitcase. Always pack your own suitcase with items that you know that are yours. Never take a gift that you get from someone and bring it over the border, because, I mean, in the most drastic situation, it could be what happened to Suzana, which would be a horrible thing. And so this just really raises awareness for all those crime syndicates and those drug rings, which obviously we know are out there and that's a real thing. But it's just wild to me that they were able to con her twice. I think that's what's most shocking in this case, is that most people fall for it once and then know it well enough not to do it again, but she fell for it twice. So yeah, just a wild case. And I it fascinated me when I watched it. And so I wanted to make sure we covered it on, if not the main show, then as a bonus episode. So that does it for this case. Thank you so much again for being a patron of the show and for following us and for all of your support. We love having you as a patron, and we hope you enjoyed this bonus episode, and we'll see you again next time for another bonus episode and on the main show as well. You can catch the main episodes coming out every Wednesday. Thanks so much, and take care.